At Hyskore, we get lots of questions about how and when to use the 30028 spring pack. First of all, the DLX, or 30088, was originally intended to be used with 30 caliber guns and their various derivatives, such as a 2506, 270, 308, 3006. Anything up to a 338 Win Mag will work just fine in this rest. If you're going to use any of those guns, this will work just fine for you right out of the box. Since we introduced this rest, maybe 15, 18 years ago, there has been a huge increase in the use of guns such as the 5.56 223. Not only do these calibers have less recoil, but generally speaking, the guns are heavier than the typical 7 or 7.5 pound weight of your bolt-action wood-stocked hunting rifle. This converts to less recoil. Now, what does that mean? Isn't less recoil better? And won't that make the rest function a little bit better? Well, the answer to that is no. There will not be sufficient recoil to properly activate the compression damper. That's the gray job underneath there. Damper will provide too much resistance for those calibers. Before I take this any further, picture for a moment you take your gun and you put the buttstock against a brick wall and fire the gun. Now pick up that same gun and from the standing position, shoot it from your shoulder. If you don't believe this, have somebody take a video of you shooting that gun, and you'll see that you'll move back, maybe only a few inches, but you still will move back and your body mass will be slightly readjusted from that recoil pulse. Now go to the same exercise, putting the gun against the brick wall. The gun doesn't move, but the recoil is still there. Where does it go? Well, it gets transferred to the wall. However, in between that, there are recoil contact surfaces inside the gun. Typically on a bolt-action style gun, you're going to have that at the tang, which is right at the very back of the action where it contacts the stock. And on a heavy hitting gun, you're probably going to have a cross bolt, and you may even have a magazine and a magazine well section. All those things contact the stock, and that's where the recoil is going to go. So, what does that mean? Can you get away with 1 or 2 shots like this? Yeah, probably. If you got a synthetic stock, maybe a lot more. But what you don't know is that constant, persistent, even though it may feel light hammering, is going to open up those tolerances. And a gun that you have very comfortably shooting 1 or 1.5 MOA, all of a sudden starts shooting 2.5 or 3 MOA, and you don't know why. The reason is going to be that you've opened up tolerances inside that gun, and it's no longer going to provide the repeatability that it once had. This is why we introduced the optional purchase aftermarket spring pack for those of you who have guns that do not have sufficient recoil to properly activate the damper and make the rest cycle. What the damper is intended to do, and it does very successfully, is progressively absorb the recoil pulse on those guns in the 30 caliber range. The spring pack contains 6 springs, 2 pair, 2 yellow, 2 blue, and 2 green. The yellow springs, which is probably the pair you're going to use the most, will each absorb 2 pounds of compression for each inch of travel. That means 2 springs times 2 is 4 pounds of compression per inch of travel. And this will work well with most of your 223 guns in the typical weight range of 6 to 8 or 7 to 9 pounds. For those of you shooting typical 22 rimfire, you do not need any springs. Just disconnect the damper and use the weight of the upper carry that the gun rides on to attenuate the recoil. Then after each shot, make sure you push it forward so you're releasing your next shot from the same point. Here we're using a wrench to disconnect the forward damper connection. And what you notice is sometimes there's not a lot of clearance between this bar and the nut. To get more clearance, just simply tighten these guides down, the cant adjusters on each side, and that will elevate this section and give you the additional clearance that you need. Okay, now the damper's off. And with the damper off, this thing just cycles back and forth freely. That will work well for your 22 long rifle, but will not work well for anything else. And oh, by the way, if you're shooting a spring-powered air gun, you want to remove the damper and start all the way in the back position, because that recoils in the opposite direction from a conventional cartridge gun. Okay, we removed the yellow springs from the pack. Of course, do that carefully, especially if you're using a razor knife or something. They're a little bit intertwined, and here they are. First thing we have to do to install the springs is remove the nuts on the end of the shafts, and for that we're using an adjustable wrench. The next thing we do is slide a spring over that rod, put the nut back, and we tighten it up snug, but not too tight with the wrench, as it's not going to come off, because these are plastic insert lock nuts, and that pretty much holds them right in place. Now, of course, you do the same thing for the other side. Okay, the damper's off, and both of our springs are in place. And this is how the rest functions with the springs. You see, much less resistance than the damper, but it's not going to be so much that it's going to cause a problem with your light recoiling gun. Judging the recoil is not as easy as going to a recoil calculator or a chart. There are so many variables: bullet weight, powder weight, weight of the gun, so many different things, that the best way to test is to do an actual test to check the function and make sure it's within the parameters of the rest, and it's also going to be agreeable to the gun and not going to cause any damage. The best thing the recoil calculator can do is give you a good idea of the range within your recoil actually is going to be. The one thing you don't want to happen, whether you're using springs or the damper, is for the rest to go to a hard bottom. This is a soft bottom. That's a hard bottom. That's not what you want. If you find that you're going to a hard bottom, you take one shot to see that. If that's going to be the case, what you want to do is increase the resistance and put the next stronger spring on. While we're on that subject, if your gun is questionable and you don't know whether to use the springs or not, the test is take your damper that's installed on the rest and put some grease, heavy grease like axle grease, on the shaft of the damper right in this area. Take one shot. What will happen is that the damper will compress thusly, and the grease will leave a ring at the extent of the damper's travel. If you find that the damper has traveled less than an inch, then you need the springs. If it's traveled more than an inch, inch and a quarter, you do not need the springs, and you use the damper right as it's in the rest. At the end of the day, the rest, whether using the damper or the springs, is designed to progressively absorb the recoil pulse.